Welcome to the Big Four Accounting Firms podcast, brought to you by big4accountingfirms.com. Now, in today's podcast, I wanted to talk about somebody that decided to push back against the Big Four accounting firms in a big way. And he decided to push back against KPMG in the US. And this person, I won't mention his name, you could look it up, but he posted on LinkedIn about KPMG's mandatory vaccine policy, and he pushed back in a pretty smart way because he's pushing back and saying that KPMG decides to be the most inclusive, or says they want to be one of the most inclusive places to work where everyone feels welcome. But then he says the CEO said that they have to discriminate against certain people because the federal government told them to. And he said it did not say it was for their safety. He said it was because the firm would already have this rule in place, and that starting January 4th, that you have to have vaccination in order for them to come back to work. But I think you probably have the ability to work remotely if you can work remotely. Unfortunately, there's some like internal firm people that probably cannot work remotely. And there's probably just some people that can't work remotely. But he's basically pushing back on the CEO for trying for trying to be two things at once. One's saying they're trying to be inclusive because they're trying to fit into that DEI model that I talk about all the time. But at the same time, they're willing to discriminate against certain employees. And I mean, this is a hot topic, but it's just interesting because every now and then you see these things blow up, these types of letters. Usually it's people, when they leave the Big Four accounting firms, they send a farewell email and they say something ridiculous. But in this instance, it's this vaccine mandate. It doesn't surprise me that this happened. I'm sure this is happening in multiple places. And there's a lot of reaction to this article. This person's a director, so they're not a partner yet. So they're putting their necks out there because potentially could be a partner, and I'm sure this will have some bearing on it to push back against the CEO and to just call them out, and for calling them out for being a hypocrite, because that's exactly, I mean that's the way the Big Four accounting firms are, right? They want to be the most inclusive. They want to help everybody until it comes to the day-to-day work, and they don't really follow through on any of that. And the way they execute it is not, at all. It's all just for press releases. And they'll bend very easily, especially to governments. And I think it's just interesting that it's happening at KPMG. I mean, we've just been talking about KPMG so much recently and all the headaches they've been going through, and this is just another one. Most of the Big Four accounting firms have similar policies where you have to be vaccinated to come back to the office or go to a client site. That's just like a policy. I'm sure it's for them. I'm not sure necessarily it's because they have so much work from the federal government. I think it's just more of probably their insurance policies of what they can, the type of coverage they can get. I'm sure this is pretty typical. I'm sure it also is a little bit of the federal contractor work, but a lot of that stuff, those vaccine mandates in the U.S. have been pushed back on in the courts. But I think this person's aware of that and they speak to that, but they're just talking about how the CEO trying to be the most inclusive, but on the other side saying he has to discriminate against certain employees is hypocritical. But I guess I want to talk about this too from another perspective, right? Like speaking out against your company publicly. People have done this in the Big Four in the past. Like there's a person that analyzed how much time they spent. There's just people that do this every now and then. Should you do this? Well, I mean, if you feel like it's the right thing to do and you're willing to give up a lot, because this person, could be discriminated against now working at KPMG. I'm sure they will, just my knowledge of KPMG and how they work. They most likely will, unless they have a really, really good leadership team around them that looks out for them no matter what. But even then, they might be discriminated against. And then additionally, let's say you get fired because this KPMG in any company can find anywhere in their global policy, and then they all have global policies around social media because people do all this stuff, do this type of stuff all the time. Not necessarily this specifically, but they make mistakes on social media. The big four accounting firms are client-facing people, and so if you do anything that interferes with that, then they can fire you, and they all have policies. So you have to be ready, and right after you post something like this, to be fired. So is the thing that you're standing for so important that you're willing to be fired? That's number one. And number two is, let's say you get fired and you think, I'm an accountant, I can get a job anywhere. Well, you just posted this publicly. And if people are going to look you up when they're looking to give you a job and they find this and they find that you're going to speak out against them, post these long things, like, are they really going to hire you? So you have to be willing to give everything up, not only your current job, but any future prospective jobs that you might want to get, because it's going to make it harder to hire you. Because why would anybody hire anybody that's willing to voice his opinion, unless that's like the brand of the company that you're willing to work for? But in public accounting and private accounting, nobody's going to really want this type of person who's going to disclose their inner workings. And I know that might be sad, or it might not be what you expect. It might not be what the big four accounting firms portray to the world, but it's reality. And so should you do this? I would say no, unless you're willing to give up a lot, willing to give up everything as far as a normal career would go. But that's just, I mean, and that's another reason why I wanted to cover this. I just didn't want to cover it from only the mandate perspective. I wanted to cover it from posting something extremely controversial to social media as a public accountant and as just an accountant in general. Like, you really have to consider whether it's worth it, like the emotions in the moment, whether it's worth it long term, and whether there's some other way that you can push back on these things. But that's the update for today. Make sure to subscribe to this podcast to get future updates, and check out the show notes for helpful links. Thanks for listening.